Welcome to Health Systems CIO's interview with Tommy Rowley, Senior Director of Customer Insights with KLAS. I'm Anthony Guerra, founder and editor-in-chief. Tommy, thanks for joining me.
Oh, you bet, Anthony. Great to be here.
All right, very good. So the report we're talking about today is called EHR Interoperability 2024. Clinician needs still not being met. Sad, but true. We have to deal with the realities of it, right? So let's start off. You want to tell me a little bit about your role, maybe some of the different things you're covering over at KLAS, then we'll get into the report.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been at KLAS for about 7 years. KLAS, a lot of people know us from our best in class research, where we interview CIOs across health systems, and we'll publish back reports based on their anonymous feedback of such and such EHR won best in class this year. I focus really on end user satisfaction research as part of what we call the Arch Collaborative. I manage a team of analysts who help with that product line and serve those customers.
Okay, very good. So the report, a few of the highlights here, and you can get into them. Internal sharing is pretty good. Obviously that needs further definition in terms of what we mean by internal sharing, what applications we're sharing data among. But internal sharing pretty good in a health system. External sharing's the problem. Um, but it can be done well because some are doing it well. So just not everyone's doing it well. Some are having challenges. I'm going to let you jump in, and then I'll ask follow-up questions. So your major thoughts about what you found in the report.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Anthony. One thing I'll say is we've been studying interoperability for a long time at KLAS. I think the industry has had this as a priority for a number of years. One of the things we tried to kind of bring back to readers' remembrance in the report was that, in 2004, this was executive order by that administration that we were going to, in the next 10 years, be able to have access to data regardless of where that data originated, that patient data access would be in a great spot. And we're now 20 years past that, and we've got less than half of clinicians feeling like they're getting the data they need when they need it. And so I don't want it to be too doom and gloom, because we celebrate progress and we want things to improve. But I think there is kind of a call to action in this report that, the stakeholders in the industry that really, that own this problem and solution, that there's just making sure that everyone understands there's a lot of work yet to be done, and we've by no means arrived. I think that's kind of the main headline of this report.
Yeah, any thoughts on what you're hearing? Did you get into the impediments? Are they saying, or is this just clinicians saying we don't feel like we're getting what we need? Or is there any information you surface as to why? I mean, it makes me think of fire, which a lot of people talked about as a very positive thing, but then you would hear, like the idea that there's lots of flavors of fire. You have a standard, and everyone says, "Oh, we have a standard," but then if you talk to people really in the know, well, they say, "Well, there are about 8 flavors of the standard." So I know that's a very difficult issue. So, in terms of why we're not getting where we want to be, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think you nailed it with standards. So standards are great, but when they're as broad as they seem to be now, a lot of people can meet the standard. But if at the end of the day, you've got physicians, nurses, you name the clinical role, saying, I'm not getting what I need to help this patient at this time, those standards clearly aren't meeting the mark. And so in our interviews with end users, that was one thing, particularly from executive leadership, where they felt we need more granularity on those. Um, and frankly, uh, they feel like EHR vendors have a lot of ability here, to really help move the needle. And so, we know that The different vendors out there are working on this, but it was interesting to me how everyone that we talked to felt like they were meeting legal standards, yet didn't feel like those standards were moving the needle enough. So I think more granularity there certainly is one thing that we can do.
Yeah. Do you know any more detail on what the clinicians say they're not getting? Any more specificity on the type of data they want, what they want that they're not
Yeah,
getting?
no, it's a great question. So what's interesting is that you kind of have two different I'm sure there are a lot of categories of problems, but to get into two really broad ones, when you have different when you have neighboring systems that are operating two different EHRs, I think that's where you get into the problem of the data is not showing up as much as we think it should. So there's that issue. I think the other issue is that even if data is flowing, particularly if we're going like for like, the other health system runs the same vendor we do, data might be coming in, but sometimes it's actually the inverse where it's too much. Um, sometimes there's this CCD that's 30 pages long. And if I'm looking for a very specific piece of information at the point of care, that's not that helpful. And so, from an end user perspective, they, even though the data is being shared, in their mind, it might as well be not being shared, right? So, we actually see a lot of commentary around that where people will admit that data is flowing back and forth, but whether it's really usable, whether it's in their workflows, that's really the next level that I think by and large we haven't wrapped our arms around as an industry.
And that sounds to me like more communication is needed between the CIOs and the clinicians, right? That's where you get governance committees and all these kind of things, because as you said, the CIO could be sitting back with their feet up saying, the data's coming in. And the clinician's going, this is not what I need at all. This is useless, right? The big data dump. So
Yep.
that's where you need that communication. And that's where end user satisfaction is more of a key than checking off a box in IT.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah.
I One of the things that kind of calls to mind is we saw in the report. We talked to some of those folks who had better satisfaction here, and one of the things we looked at was some of the education metrics around interoperability. So we asked end users, do you agree that your education has helped you prepare you to leverage outside data? And the people who agree that they've been taught how to do it, well, three-quarters of that group feels like their EHR provides the interoperability they need. But on the flip side, the people who are in that group that don't feel like they've gotten the training they need, they haven't been made aware of what capabilities are out there, only a quarter of that group feel like their EHR is interoperable. And that can be at the same system. So
Mm,
they're using the same EHR, they have the same capabilities, presumably, to share data back and forth. But that lack of awareness, that lack of education certainly seems to play a role, to your point.
right. So not enough to dump in the data and leave it there. You have to find out what exactly the clinicians want to see, deliver it, and then educate your clinician population on how they access it in the way they've told you they want to see it. So you got to
Absolutely.
finish, right? You got to take it all. And again, if you're relying on user satisfaction and you're scoring that and you're surveying that, that's going to be the true measure, right? Because if they're not happy, they're not happy for whatever reason. You got to fix it and find out why they're not happy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all of these leadership teams that we talk to, and we talk to a lot of groups across the country. I have no doubt that these folks are actively pursuing progress in this area. I really think that people are giving it their best effort. Um, but yeah, that end user piece really is a valuable tool in the toolkit. And if you don't measure that, how do you know?
Hmm.
Because if you have this dashboard of indicators saying, hey, we pulled in this many tens of thousands of data elements this month. Interoperability is great. Well, then you move on to something else because you feel like you've checked that box. But without that kind of, I guess, canary in the coal mine, I don't know what the best analogy is, but without that end user piece, you don't really know. So yeah, you're spot on.
And the better CIOs will tell you that that's their job, is to make the users' lives better. So they know that. If you lose sight of that and you think your job is to, like we said, if your job is to bring data into the organization and you sort of stop there, you can really miss the mark. And this is what your report is saying, that people are missing the mark in some way, shape, or form, because the clinicians are frustrated and don't feel they have the information they need in order to deliver the best care. They don't have it in the way they want it, as easily as they want it. So there's work to be done. So the message from this report to the CIOs is, you need to delve into this. There's dissatisfaction there. Figure out why, figure out if it's a technical problem. Are you not bringing the data into the health system? Is it coming in, but it's too much? Or you're not educated? It could be any number of ways, but you got to dig into the weeds and find out why the dissatisfaction is surfacing in the report that you just did.
Yeah, and really, it's hard work. I mean, when we talk about this next level of getting end users really satisfied and getting them the type of data they want, this isn't something that um, there's not a ton of models out there to follow. I mean, we have over 500 measurements now that we've done, and I think we got 17 of those where 70% of the end users felt like they were getting what
Yeah.
they needed from interoperability. So this isn't really an indictment on folks. This is a hard thing to do, and frankly, when we talk about that the standards piece, they're not being pushed to get to this level really, and so this really is people laser focused on end user and patient satisfaction, laser focused on solving their concerns, whether or not they feel like those concerns are fair given the current landscape. So when we talk about, governance, collaborating with neighboring organizations, identifying metrics that really matter, um, again, there's not a ton of playbooks out there to do this, and so that's why I think this is so critical to understand. Okay, it's nice to know there's at least a few organizations that are doing this and doing it well. Can the rest of us get our hands dirty and do that difficult work of getting to that next level?
Yeah, and it makes me think how it's been around for a long time, but how critical that CMIO, and there's a number of different variations on that title now. There's got to be about three or four different ways to say it, but we'll call it the CMIO. That's sort of the most established title. How critical that position is to a health system success. It's just, to me, it's so huge. You have to have the right person in that position to bridge that gap between the clinicians and IT.
Yeah, they have to be an advocate, right? And I think um, CIOs have a lot on their plate. I mean, a lot of these people, they're managing application suites that get into the hundreds, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they have a lot that they're trying to monitor and get the best out of the systems they're leveraging. And also, you've got all this M&A activity across the country too, and so you've got organizations coming together, and you know, some might think of interoperability as like the finishing work, and it's like, hey, I'm bringing on, you know, 2,000 users by this point next year, and so I'm focused on this implementation. So it's a tough thing to do, but you're right. Having that clinical IT kind of hybrid role is essential. Whether you call it a CMIO or something else. And I think one of the things we've noticed in the best CMIOs that we talk to, when they hear the frustration from physicians and nurses, these are people that are not quick to get defensive. To not feel like, hey, you've impugned my character. You don't feel like we're doing enough for you. These are people that just want to solve the problem, and they really do advocate for those end users, and that's a major personality trait, I think, in these people that make progress here.
Very good. So you do have I think you call them steps, but you identified best practices in the report. There's 4 steps. There's a number of items under each one. I don't know what level of detail you want to get into that, but what are your thoughts that you want to communicate around these best practices?
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about how, we looked at several hundred organizations, came up with a little over a dozen that, were doing this really well. We interviewed some of those top performers, and we didn't have any preconceived notions as to, what the right way to do this is. We really left it to them to explain in their own words, what they're doing to move the needle here. And what was really interesting is that, there really were a handful of items that started to just emerge in every one of these conversations. And as we'll go through this, I think people might listen to this and say, okay, that's no duh, class. That's not, of course, if I did that, this it'll lead to this outcome, or I think I'm already doing that already. But I thought it was really interesting. So step one was really seeking out as much connection as you can. So I think a lot of people are connected to regional HIEs. A lot of people feel like they've, turned on whatever sharing settings they can within their systems. This is one where vendors can also help too. Not all vendors default those sharing settings on. And one of our CMIOs was really emphatic about this. He said, we're not all on, and we need to all be on for this to work at all. So I think there's this kind of first level of, okay, am I really committed to sharing everything I possibly can? Am I actively seeking out everything in our geographic region, everything my vendor's offering? One of the other messages of the report is across every one of these steps, we feel like the vendors are critical partners. So if I'm an Epic customer, am I utilizing Happy Together? Meditech just came out with Traverse, which is, their kind of package of interoperability, products and items. Am I really trying to push the envelope on this? So that's, I think, step one. Uh, the next step, I think, is, and I guess even within that first kind of pillar, am I committed enough that it's very clear at our organization what our interoperability goals? Have we documented that? Do we meet regularly on that? Is this just something that we put in a charter somewhere and put, left to the side, or are we actively thinking about this as an organization? Uh, once you've gotten to that stage, one of the things that was really interesting when we talked to these folks, they said, it's really daunting to share 100% of data with 100% of people out there. Getting our arms around complete interoperability seems like a tall task, but what if we could just identify where 85% of our data goes and the 10 or 12 regional partners where that happens? And what if we started meeting with them once a quarter, once a month, and developed shared standards and practices? We talked about how standards can be so um, vague to the point
Hmm.
where people can interpret them different ways. Well, what if we just took that on ourselves to say, okay, 10 organizations in this region, we're agreeing to this, and the other to really get at the needs. So that's really step two, is kind of finding your cohort that you can work with. We would say that step three is really within that subset of people, can we agree on the most pertinent measures that we want to be sharing back and forth? So we talked to one system, they said, listen, whether it's HEP screenings, hemoglobin A1C, some of these really key metrics that we follow all the time to manage our patient populations, we want that.
Hmm.
And if we can laser focus on a few metrics, then we can start saying, okay, let's do the deep work of getting this into workflows like you shared earlier. Maybe we can't get everything, we don't have the resources to get everything perfectly within clinical workflows, but could we take a handful that we feel are the most important and make them just so in line with what a clinician's doing every day? And then step forward, to your point, would just be that education and awareness piece of, do all of our end users know where to go and what to do? Or is this knowledge kind of trapped in the CMIO's head and a few others? So anyway, a lot there, but those are kind of those four steps if I were to summarize.
So the what I see as the big problem here on the ground is that the idea, which makes sense, is that don't worry if you're in New Jersey, don't worry about sharing with the health system in California, right? Let's make that one extreme use case. Let's not build our world around that. Let's build it in our region where we will see the most patients from other health systems. Makes sense. But these are also your competition,
Sure.
right? So that's where the rub comes in. It's like we pretend that, I mean, it's not for profit, but we pretend that it's almost like a government run, like there's one health, so there's no competition, but there's severe competition. You talked about M&A. What is M&A? M&A is competition. It's gobbling up your competitors, usually. So there's this idea or there's this conflict between healthcare would be so much better, clinicians would be so much happier, and patients would be healthier if we did the regional work and we sat around the campfire and we all exchanged data, but these are our most fierce competitors. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I don't disagree necessarily that's part of the equation. And maybe I'm naive, but I do talk to these providers every day, um, and I am pretty blown away by um, their level of wanting to coordinate. I understand that if you're an EHR vendor and you've got proprietary technology and you feel like this is a competitive advantage to have people sharing information your way, I still don't think that's the right way to go about it. I think that we should be more open there. But on the provider side, I don't get that sense that, hey, I want to keep this close to the vest because I think in their minds, they feel, okay, I want to get as much as I can and I've got to give to get. That's that personally. That's the way I have interpreted those conversations. I've been really impressed by people's willingness. It's really hard. It takes a lot of effort to get together and to dive into, okay, what are the exact reasons why this didn't show up? We've got a clinician who works at these two locations and he says that he entered this one day, worked at the other place, couldn't find it.
Hmm.
Getting it's really just how hard it is rather than a lack of willingness. I think.
Well, let's have a fun little debate, and not a long debate, but I would say that the people you're talking to are not the ones that are going to have that competitive agenda. It's the
Sure.
CEO level, right? So it's in that conversation, or who knows where it's the CIO describing to the CEO the agenda of the plans and what we're going to do, and perhaps the CEO going, "Oh, really? You're going to exchange?" I don't know. Anyway,
Sure. And
it's
frankly,
yeah,
the people we're talking to, particularly in the Arch Collaborative, these are people that are bought into, hey, all boats rise together. This is
right.
an industry issue we need to come together on. So you're right. It does kind of self-select for people who maybe want to collaborate and coordinate more than the typical leadership team. So yeah, I wouldn't discount that.
Who knows, right? Who knows if that's some factor in a lack of regional exchange. Who knows? It
Sure.
it may play some role, but we don't know. Um, so that's good stuff. Interesting report. Obviously, a huge issue, huge point of clinician satisfaction, what everyone's working on. Any final message for this? You get the CIOs. I mean, I think we covered a lot of it. I mean, the takeaway from for me is a reminder, a red flag to the CIOs and the CMIOs, although the CMIOs should be more in touch with those users and really know this, but the CIOs, I think we covered it very well, which is you need to uncover for at your own health system what your users think about the interoperability you're delivering or not delivering. How do they feel about it? Regardless of how you feel about it, you have to find out how they feel about it, and if they're not happy, why, and then address that. right? Because
Yeah.
you've discovered there is unhappiness. So at least it should give you pause as a CIO to go, well, maybe I better check.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe this is not the best analogy. I don't know, but if my spouse comes to me and says, I'm unhappy, it it doesn't do a lot of good for me to try to convince her that she's not that unhappy. Um, Usually it's a lot more productive to try to understand what's going on and what could be changed or done differently. And these are might be different relationships, but I think that's something that, yeah, number one, you've got to know. So if you're not measuring this, and you don't have to use our tool, there's a lot of ways to ask people how they're doing. But if you can formally measure this, that's step one, I think. Um, and I think tied to that, one of the things we noticed in the report is, we ask a lot of questions that are not free form, but we do have a few open kind of text comment questions. And when we ask physicians, what's the number one thing that you would fix in the EHR tomorrow if you could? Their top thing is interoperability. And so when you've got your most expensive resource who's delivering world-class care and you're trying to keep these people, you talk about competition, keeping physicians is a pretty important thing. Um, and that group is literally telling you, hey, this is a top priority for us. I would hope that that would be a wake up call. And the only other thing I would say is I hope people don't discount the best practices as, well, yeah, that's common sense. Common sense, I think we all know, isn't that common. And being able to be humble enough to say, okay, are we actually doing the best we possibly could across these 4 or 5 steps? That would be the other thing I would ask people to do.
All right, Tommy, that's great information, interesting report, certainly concerning results that everyone should focus on, but that's why you do the reports, is to let people know what's up. So great stuff, Ona. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me on, Anthony. Really appreciate it.